Yes, welcome everybody. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and had good conversations over lunch. You are in the session on AI for health. In case you want to be at a different session, this is your time to leave now, but believe me, you don't want to. This session will have some differences to some of the other sessions. We are looking at health also through an engineering perspective. And so you may have heard of artificial intelligence by now, and it has all these promises. And the question is really, how many of those promises can it fulfill once the hype is over? Because at that time, measurement will happen. And how can we actually determine that AI is actually fulfilling its promises? Because we are talking about high-dimensional data sets, health data sets, mapped to complex predictions, classifications, many of which are actually not clear. In health, most of the time, nobody knows what the actual truth is, maybe long time after the fact. Then you know what the truth is. When you build a classifier, that's really bad. That's really a bad thing. Usually you know what the truth is. So we are having an esteemed panel here to discuss all those complexities involved with artificial intelligence for health. They can also, I have made very little requests to my panelists because I want our discussion to be as open and interesting as possible. Still, I think it makes sense to set the stage by each of them. So if you want to go ahead and take 5 to 7 minutes to give a short introductory presentation and basically provide your projection on the topic, then please, it's up to you to come here. So the first one we agreed would be Khair ElZarrad. He's a Deputy Director of the FDA, and he'll be talking about his perspective on the topic. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Khair ElZarrad. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Medical Policy within the Center for Drugs at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. It's a pleasure being with you here today. Just briefly about my office, we do not do directly regulation in my office. We blend the policies around regulations. So we think a lot about what's coming our way, digital innovations, digital tools, AI, and other potential innovations, and how can we be ready as an agency to handle this technology 5, 10 years from now. So this is a really kind of a challenging task, as you can all imagine, and I'm going to just touch on that a little bit in my intro remarks. So just to make sure that all of us are on the same page, this is just a general overview of the drug development process. As you see, it starts with the drug discovery. You can start by thousands of compounds there. You start screening them, looking at them, and then you go with the promising compounds. You move from thousands to hundreds in the preclinical setting. And then when you have identified certain drugs that are promising, then when you go to the FDA and ask practically for a permission, for an okay to go into human testing. This is what we call clinical trials. And the clinical trials are extremely expensive process and long process. And what I want you to take out of this slide is the duration. This takes sometimes approximately 10 years for a promising compound to become a drug. This is the system that we've been utilizing over and over again for the last probably 30, 40 years. And the power of clinical trials as a research tool is there. We all know about it, and we appreciate it. However, we have to change this paradigm. We have to really evolve. We have to think, how can we get therapeutics faster to our patients? Ultimately, we're civil servants, and we have to focus on public health. So this is where it comes to, I think, AI, digital tools, and how can we move forward with this paradigm. Evidence in general is really changing around us. This is just a brief illustration of some of the technological innovations around the drug development. The top left side of that, it's a presentation, slide from a presentation by Paul Sims, the chairman of I4Pharma last year in Barcelona. And he was talking about the fastest growing companies in pharmaceuticals. And if you notice, the majority of them are technology companies. So I thought that was really kind of interesting to see this developing paradigm here. Also, of course, all of you are aware now, our technology companies and the private sector and pharma are all coming together to kind of become more of a data-focused, digital-focused corporations, if you would. I was told, one of the CEO mentioned that if you're a pharma company and you do not realize yet that you have to be a technology company yet, you're not paying attention. So that's give you an idea. At the same time, at the bottom here, you're probably familiar with some of those, Alexa and the iWatch, et cetera. All these tools are becoming more ubiquitous and becoming part of the daily life of a lot of our people, a lot of our citizens, a lot of our patients as well. And it behooves us to start thinking, how can we best utilize this data? And that makes the point in my next slide. You know, typically as a regulator, we think of data as randomized clinical trials, as you see on the top box here. However, data is being generated in multiple formats. A lot of you are aware now, we have pharmacy dispensations, we have digital sensors that are ubiquitous across the population, we have lab results, electronic health records, and diagnostic registries, patient registries. So there are this multi kind of stream of data that can be relevant to help us and understand a little bit better about our patients and how therapeutics behave. So that's not enough though. You can have a lot of data, but that's not enough. How do you analyze this data? How do you make sense of it? How do you process it, if you would, to produce what we call evidence? Evidence is data that can be utilized to help you make a decision, you know. And that's might be simple laid out here, but it's a very complex process. And for us as regulators, we really need to understand this across the board, from the point of origination all the way until the data become evidence and how it's utilized, hopefully to support us make critical decisions. So technology and advanced analytics are essential across the board here. As you can imagine, I would say even technology is the cornerstone here. And this is why the complexity of this pathway requires us to think about the transparency and the shared understanding in a global ecosystem. You know, the world is changing around us. Coding can be done in any place in this world. Clinical trials can be done in multiple sites across the world. So this is a global environment, and we really need to have this shared understanding on how to manage these data sources and the analytics and go beyond. This is why I think the work that you're going to hear about from the focus group, AI for Health, is really critical to bring us all together, along with the work that other work that WHO and the ITU are doing in this arena. So generally, if you wanted to really have a quick overview on how AI has been utilized, I put here just a couple of references for you. Advancing Drug Discovery via Artificial Intelligence. This goes over how basic science is being induced and facilitated using AI algorithm. They make a very, very good cases for how AI can be utilized in early drug identification. However, also it's been utilized in clinical trials. For example, clinical trials right now fail a lot of times just simply for the lack of recruitment. So how can AI be utilized to help us fill that gap? This another paper, another source, just gives you an idea of how that can happen. To mention just one example, because I don't want to spend much time here, I want to open it for discussion later on. A lot of you probably heard a couple of months ago about the innovation that happened in identifying a potential drug in 46 days using AI algorithms to scan a lot of data. And to give you an idea, they said 46 days here. Typically, this takes months to a year. You know, so the scale of what we're going to see, hopefully, is very promising. And it touches on that, and like we need to really come together to start working and understanding how we can handle this from a regulatory perspective. I would even put the effort of the WHO Global Strategy on Digital Health as a centerpiece for this. Also, the WHO and ITU work on the focus group, also very helpful. Just to give you also a couple of ideas on what we're doing at the agency, at the FDA, we've already been clearing AI algorithm, and here this is a paper from Nature showing some of the tools and the algorithms that have been cleared at the agency. Also, we've been thinking a lot about how to move to adaptive algorithm, how to move to an algorithm that can be utilized to support devices or drugs that changes over time. And we produce this framework here. It's not a regulation. It's our way of kind of reaching out to all the expertise outside and telling them, here's our current thinking. Please let us know what you think. And we've had a lot of comments on this framework. I highly encourage you to read it if you're interested in this field. So I don't want to miss the ethical and the human aspect of this. I think it's really critical to understand the ethical implications around AI and the digital tool in general. You know, like we have our current paradigms that can be assessed using IECs, independent ethical committees, or IRBs, for example. The question is, do we have the right expertise on those committees to start analyzing how AI can impact our patients, how digital tool can impact our patient? Those are critical questions that we should not miss. Also, biases are embedded in this algorithm. A lot of you are aware of that. They're really a reflection of us. Our database is a reflection of us and our own biases, and there are multiple examples of that. And from there, I just want to conclude by saying that shared understanding and collaboration are really important. The International Council for Harmonization is a critical effort across the board that have multiple regulatory agencies coming together trying to understand how can we harmonize our regulation and our approaches. The ITU and the WHO effort and the focus group, of course, are a critical aspect of this as well. Rapidly evolving technological innovations, as I showed you, require robust regulatory frameworks. We cannot operate in a matter of years. I get frustrated now when my Twitter feed doesn't update in 3 seconds. So to give you an idea, we have to evolve with our technologies. We must address ethical and human subject protection issues. This should be a critical centerpiece as we move forward. And business processes need to evolve along with technological advances. And I think this is really hard to do because we've been doing the same thing for the last 30 and 40 years. Now we have to bring teams together, not just individual expertise working on these issues. And that's mean our organizations in general have to shift. And as you can imagine, it's like shifting the Titanic a lot of times, especially when you have large corporations. Nonetheless, we have no excuse. We have to shift and advance. And the last comment I want to have is that our principal deputy commissioner, Dr. Amy Abernethy, if you're on Twitter, please follow her. She actually highlights a lot of these innovations and how she want the agency to move forward to address those innovations. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Khair. So our next speaker is Bernd Montag. He's the CEO of Siemens Healthineers.
So, if okay, I stay here. So then nobody realizes that I don't have slides, yeah? And normally I irritate people when I stand up here. So some thoughts. I talk about it from the perspective of a company, as I introduced yesterday, who is solely focused on basically making the healthcare system better and more efficient. Yeah, we are working on the system. We are not developing drugs. We are not developing stents or so. Yeah, so we try to make the delivery of care better and more efficient. Yeah? So, Mr. Wiegand, you talked about two important words: hype, yeah, and promise. And maybe as a reflection in the beginning, I mean, for those of you who were born before 1980, yeah, we consciously lived or experienced the dot-com bubble, yeah. But we also live in the reality of today, yeah, where a lot of the topics, yeah, which were promises in the early 2000s, really have changed our world, yeah. I mean, companies like Amazon and how we structure our life. But on the other hand, there was a bubble, yeah, which means back then we maybe weren't so clear what exactly the promise is, yeah, and sometimes underestimated or overestimated the speed, yeah. And I want to use this analogy a little bit, yeah. I think first of all, it needs to be clear what is the promise. Yeah, is it now the wonder drug? Is that solving all the things which have not been solved before? Or is it about solving mundane issues step by step? Yeah, so that one of the problems when you have a hype is when everybody can interpret, has his own vision of what it is and not. So I think we need to be specific what we work on. Now I come a little bit to our perspective. Yeah, we are our strength as a company is we are in the field of imaging, in lab diagnostics, also in intervention in minimally invasive therapies and so on. But with this, we cover areas of medicine which can be easily digitized. Yeah, because I mean, when you look at an image, it's basically a digital asset. Yeah? So when it comes to the digitalization of healthcare, by definition, we are at the forefront, yeah? Because these are the most digital subjects. And I am convinced that the first promise is make things more efficient. Yeah? It is not about solving things which have not been solved before. In the very beginning, AI in healthcare will be about efficiency and productivity. Yeah? Taking care of routine tasks, yeah? So that radiologists don't count lesions in a multiple sclerosis patient. You don't need to study 10 years and do a residency in radiology to then count lesions on a screen. Yeah? This is a great effort. Yeah? And this is big progress. Because the next step it does, when you free up, when you take away this routine tasks, free up the resources, is that on the one hand, the physician can work on higher tasks. Yeah? His job is elevated, not replaced, it's elevated. And the second effect is, and I think that's the second promise, you make the technology available. Yeah? So even when no radiologist is available, the routine can be done in remote areas. Yeah? So the second big promise I see is solving the staff shortage problem, which is one of the big challenges we all discuss here when it comes to access to good medicine. Yeah? How can we make sure that certain diagnoses can be made even when there is no physician around? Yeah? But it's still not the magic, yeah, of solving a problem which has not been solved before from a medical scientific point of view. And only in the third step, we should expect that it is the wonder drug, yeah, where we find ways where AI does things which no human could be doing. Yeah? And I believe it is not, well, let's say, to have this realistic view of working step by step. First, productivity. Second, availability, affordability, and then going where no man has been going before is the order of things. Yeah? And this is what we apply internally, and I say that not to advertise, but just to illustrate how it is for us. So I sometimes call it a crawl, walk, run approach. First thing, I mean, I use imaging as an example. We make a CT and a MR scanner more intelligent because it recognizes the shape of a patient, automatically applies the right scan protocol and the right X-ray dose based on AI. Yeah? So what is the benefit? Less errors, better quality. You don't need necessarily a super qualified person to do this. Yeah? This is real help. Is it like a moonshot? No, but it is real help. Next step is help interpret the image. Yeah? So where it's instead of visualization, you take the routine task of what is wrong in the heart, what is wrong with, do you find lesions in the lung, do you automatically find the aorta, measure the diameter, and so on. Take all that routine away. Yeah? Then in a next step, yeah, so I say crawl, walk, run, yeah, aggregate data from imaging, from the lab, from the EMR, and so on, apply guidelines and apply AI to make recommendations for the next step in the clinical pathway. Yeah? We call this the pathway companion. Yeah? So we always talk about companions because they are helpers for the medical professional. And then the next step, and this is where we are very early only, is to have a digital twin, yeah, where we have started with a heart model, yeah, where we have a digital twin of the patient's heart and then can apply the companion, so to say, on that digital twin, so that, so to say, virtual medicine is happening. And then we are more in the space of where we go, now we are in new territory for medicine. Yeah? But I strongly believe we need to be clear what problem we want to solve, and we need to take this stepwise approach and not start with the most difficult problem first, yeah, which we also saw other people see innovation and say, well, let's solve the problem of oncology. It didn't work because it's too complex. Yeah? So it's working our way up. For us, this almost has become an industrial process. Yeah? So we have which is also interesting, yeah? So that we have now a collection of a data lake of close to 1 billion curated data of medical data, a supercomputer, and where basically this data lake and the supercomputer is like an automated software development. Yeah? So it becomes kind of an industry to develop AI.
Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Naomi Lee. She's executive editor at The Lancet. Naomi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. So I can't stand too close to the mic. Great, okay. Okay, great. 10 years ago, I was a urology registrar and I was in an exam. It's related, I promise. And the examiner asked me, what's the best treatment for intermediate risk prostate cancer? And of course, you're going to work out I'm that kind of person. I've memorized all the guidelines, so I'm confident. And I say, radical prostatectomy or radiotherapy according to patient choice. And the examiner says, yeah, okay, well, why? Well, because it's in the guidelines. It's the European guidelines, it's the American guidelines. And the examiner says, yeah, but why? Okay, now I'm completely stumped and I've got no idea. So, of course, I went home that night and I start digging into all of the evidence underlying these recommendations. And that starts this tailspin, which unfortunately ends my promising surgical career and leads me to become head of research at the Lancet. So what I discovered, and what I'm sure most of you are going to know, is that there's a hierarchy of evidence, starting from expert opinion, which is the lowest, and going up to randomized control trial and systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And it's those last two that usually change practice. So that's the ultimate goal, improving practice for the patients. And if we wanted to think what that might look like for something which is new, a new drug, then we have these stages of phased evaluation going from something which is preclinical through to what we normally consider this kind of gold standard randomized control trial, and ultimately a phase 4 trial where we assess safety in a larger population. And alongside that, there are a number of checkpoints. So checkpoints from funders, checkpoint from regulators, which are often based on evidence published by journals. We have our own checkpoints, so we look at reporting guidelines. So we have this kind of pipeline of how interventions come through and a number of safety checkpoints. Okay, now, obviously this is great because what we want to do is have a burden of proof that's required to change practice. And the reason for that is we want it to be safe for patients. So we never want to use a brand new oncology drug that doesn't work as well as the old one. That's dangerous. We also want it to be efficient. So we always want to have a stage where we abandon early medicines that don't work, and we never then have any research waste. And finally, we never want to use a medicine which doesn't have an evidence base, because that's a waste of money if we're buying something that doesn't work. And so what I think I'm convincing you is that we have this kind of pipeline for assessing any new proposal that's in health. It works pretty well. There's some problems. We've heard about them. But what you'll appreciate is that it goes beyond accuracy. So when we think about artificial intelligence, we often think about accuracy, but when we think about health, we also think about efficacy, cost-effectiveness, and safety. Okay, so it's great. I've convinced you all that we have this wonderful pipeline for assessing new interventions, so why am I here? Well, the truth is that it doesn't really work well for lots of things, especially not for artificial intelligence. And there are kind of 3 main reasons why it doesn't work. And one of those is around bias. So if you think that I have a model that I've developed in my local hospital, where my local hospital is 97% white Caucasians and it's 3% ethnic minorities, well, my model can actually perform very well in all of these tests by performing 100% in all of the white Caucasians and 0% in anyone that isn't a white Caucasian, but it still passes all of those goals. It's biased. Also, cost. Khair told you about how much a randomized control trial costs and how long it takes. So to think about doing that for everything that we might want to do an artificial intelligence model for, it's almost prohibitive. And then finally, we understand that artificial intelligence models should be adaptive. Well, what do we do every time it changes? We can't do another randomized control trial. It's impossible. Okay. So I'm going to use the last few minutes to tell you about something that Thomas, Khair, myself, some of Bernardo's colleagues have been working on, which is a focus group for artificial intelligence for health, supported by World Health Organization and the International Telecommunications Union. And this focus group is really around establishing a collaborative community that's looking at evaluation in artificial intelligence. And we came up with this kind of model of how things could work if we wanted to have an efficient pipeline like we have for assessing new drugs for artificial intelligence models. So for example, you might develop a model, you might validate it, you might benchmark it, you might run a trial, and then you might have safety. So it looks fairly similar to the other pipeline that we had a look at, apart from the idea about benchmarking. So what does this mean, and why do we think it's important? So the premise around benchmarking for artificial intelligence for health is that if I'm a developer and I have my artificial intelligence model that I have trained in my data and validated in my data, I now bring this to the benchmarking platform where there are a number of other data sets, either data sets from other developers, data sets from other hospitals, data sets from other countries, and I can submit my model and benchmark against it. So why is that important? It's important for a number of reasons. We know that if we want to do any kind of prognostication, we have to validate it in an independent data set. Otherwise, it might just work in my hospital on the data that I've developed in, and it won't work in yours. It's useless. So this keeps the bar to entry pretty low, because it means that I might just have my data set, but I can also do this independent validation that's required in your data set. The other reason that it's important is because it allows you to do some kind of quality assurance or comparative efficacy. So if we know that a human doctor has about 70% accuracy and the models that are submitted are between maybe 65 and 75, then we know it's probably good enough. It also then would still allow us to have this kind of gold standard of a trial, but it doesn't mean that we have to do it every time, because some people who are working on the same use case might get together, they might have a trial. Really, this is probably the best way that we would ever know that something works and changes a hard clinical endpoint like morbidity and mortality. We know that this algorithm performs well, and then when we benchmark against it, we come close. When we adapt our algorithm, we come close. So we don't need to run another trial because we understand that we're close enough. Okay. So it would be really easy for me to conclude by saying, well, robust evaluation is the greatest challenge for AI in health, but I think that's completely not true. It's not what I believe. I think that creating a pipeline like this, which is robust evaluation for AI in health, is one of the greatest opportunities, because there are many problems, as you already heard, from the way that we currently evaluate new clinical drugs, any new kind of technique or device. And if we get this right now, then what we're going to do is have an efficient pipeline, and we just keep going through, yes, it works for this, yes, it works for this, yes, it works for this. So I'm going to ask you to do two things when you go from here. The first of all is, when somebody tells you, oh, I've got this new great AI algorithm, and it works so well for this, I want you to say, really? Okay. How do you know? And if they tell you the accuracy, I want you to say, yeah, and what else? Okay? And what else? We need to know that it's a difference in a hard clinical endpoint. And right now, when we think about artificial intelligence for health, we're really stuck around this kind of phase 1 or 2 mark around validation, accuracy, benchmarking. The second thing that I want you to do when you go out of here is think, do you know what? I think I'm going to join that focus group. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Stefan Germann. He's the head of the Botner Foundation, and in addition to having very interesting things to say, the Botner Foundation is also supporting the focus group, which we are very thankful for.
Thank you. Did you know that leading scientists in life science believe that the first human to be born and live for 250 years is already born today? It's quite incredible, 250 years. What is driving some of this longevity? It is the convergence of sort of biotech and infotech into human health and well-being. At the same time, if we take Liberia, just has a life expectancy of barely over 50 years. So you might end up having 200 years of difference in terms of life expectancy across certain geographies. So that should all call us to be quite awake, even after lunch, and really get us together on reflecting of what actually can we collectively do to harness, on one hand, these powerful developments and innovations that are emerging, that are so rapid that, and I quote Daniel Siefman, who is the president of the Weizmann Institute, in a lunch not too long ago, mentioned that one of the challenges we face today is that the exponential rate of innovation, specifically driven by data, is basically, for the first time in human history, creating a challenge that our evolutionary brain capacity as individuals to cope with change is no longer coping. And that has huge implications for policymakers, regulators, that we can really sort of start to get into much more dynamic environments and much quicker environments. And we have to pose the question, randomized controlled trials was mentioned a number of times before. Does that still work in terms of health in an age of such rapid changes? We probably need new methodologies and new approaches to validate some of these issues. Now, coming back to sort of the AI component and what is driving in the next 10 to 15 years, many of the developments that we can see already happening right now. Although I think what Mr. Montag said, we do have to be slightly cautious at time, and AI at the moment is really in everyone's mouth. And 2 years ago at the World Summit for AI, there was an interesting session entitled, slightly provocative title, and said, sort of in a question mark, is AI like teenage sex? That everyone talks about it, but very few actually do it. And so at the moment as well, there's a little bit of risk that anyone who is doing anything with data just kind of puts a little bit of paintbrush on top and just names it AI. And so I think there is a risk that we are starting to sort of oversell some of the potential promises. But interesting to hear that some countries actually have been engaged and deepened in these issues for a long time. I was recently surprised that in Iran, the University of Tehran already in 2004 offered a master's degree in AI, whereas in Switzerland, the first master's degree in AI and computational sciences started about a year and a half ago. So well done. But if we sort of bring together some of the key drivers is the convergence of these sort of three elements. One is that on one hand, data within health is rapidly exploding. We have the last sort of 3-4 years probably generated more health-related data than in human history before. It's driven by social media. So a social media company did 2-3 years ago in the US a study where they basically tracked people's posting, what time they posted, what they posted, how they posted it, and then did sort of a mental health categorization in terms of what sort of mental health status the various people in the study did, and then they assessed them with psychologists and psychiatrists, and there's a basically direct match in terms of just tracking social media behavior. We have clinical data exploding. We have it heard in terms of genomic data, geospatial data. So there's a massive explosion. At the same time, AI algorithms, natural language processing, machine learning are becoming rapidly stronger and better. And eventually we will have computing power much, much stronger than everything we have ever seen. Probably some of you have heard Google had a breakthrough in quantum computing with a very limited application, so that can still take years to come till that can be applied to more complex issues. But it basically resolved within 3 minutes a problem that current best computers would take 10,000 years to solve. And so as we converge these sort of these three technology drivers, in terms of the data, the analytics, and the supercomputing, this will generate for the first time in human history an unprecedented understanding of human health and well-being. And it gives an opportunity to move away from what we have today. In most settings, we don't have healthcare systems, but we have disease treatment systems. Well, we can see that with that data and use of data, we can go much more into predictive, preventative sort of data-driven health systems. And a good example is Clalit, which is one of the largest health insurance companies in Israel, where they have started more than 20 years ago electronic medical records. And what has that led to? They have used the data of more than 4.5 million people. And they have now capabilities that they moved into creating the first social impact bond on diabetes prevention using data-driven. They have capabilities to basically sort of predict 7 to 10 years in advance if someone will develop eventually diabetes. So if we can move life science much more into the sort of preventative side of data-driven, most people would be very willing to pay for treatments that are basically preventative treatments. And so we might end up through many of these changes to move away from disease treatment systems where the incentives are structured around treatment to move into health prevention systems, data-driven, which is not something necessarily new, the data-driven pieces, but in the 16th century in China, during the Ming Dynasty, the sort of minister of health at that time introduced a system where the doctors were being paid as long as the patients were healthy and stopped paying once the person got sick. So we will probably see through that data revolution these changes. In terms of next step, just to wrap up and conclude, there's a couple of key things collectively we need to do. We seriously need to think, is there a need for an international health data sort of regulation under the World Health Organization's remit for international law, that we can really get an international sort of framework that will guide us to really harness the power of data. Secondly, and the Lancet is launching this week a new commission jointly with the Financial Times on looking at AI and health data governance, which might link to that first point. The third and last next step is, and it's good to see Ambassador Gill here, who is leading a new effort to look at an international digital and AI for health research collaborative that will tackle some of the key research questions within the space of AI and health in the coming years in a much more collaborative manner. And we will have more on this this week on the various panels. Thank you so much.
So our next speaker is Bernardo Mariano. He is in charge of building up the digital health department at the World Health Organization, which is already a task, and he is the chief innovation officer of the international of the WHO.
Thank you. I think some of you expected perhaps a woman here sitting, because I think if you have the printed booklet, Dr. Sumia Sominathan was supposed to be here, so I just crashed gate this party and then spoiled the gender balance in the process. But I hope I will do justice to Dr. Sumia if she was here, but also my hope is that as we look at this transformation of digital health and AI, we also make sure that the inclusion and leaving no one behind is part of it. Talking about inclusion, I would like to ask the audience, how many people from government are here? Please raise your hand. Very few. That's another area of inclusion. How do we ensure that as we go through the journey of healthcare transformation, the role of public sector, private sector, and academia, it's really there to ensure that we extract the best, we deliver the best, and we bring quality as we go through that transformation. Now, I wanted to talking about quality and AI. Let me just bring you 4 perspectives. I think Bernd here spoke about maintaining. Let's improve what we have. Let's ensure that the things that work, we make them better. So that's one perspective. I think Stefan spoke about new innovation, impact, and how do we ensure that as we evolve and we develop, or we live longer, as they say, they got scared when they say 250 years. So how do we ensure that all that is done in a way that the health impact, the health goals, the targets that we set to ourselves to make sure that there is universal health coverage is realized? Those dreams do not just become a dream or not just a hot topic or not just a buzzword, but it becomes a reality. The third part I wanted to talk about when we talk about quality of AI or digital health, it's the do no harm. So how can we ensure that as these 2 sectors, the tech sector and the health sector, the tech sector is used to hypes. Even the word artificial intelligence itself is a hype, right? And the health sector focus on do no harm because there's a life at stake, or there's a health situation that might result in death because there's no reset button on health. So how can we ensure these 2 sectors, as they merge to deliver the health, the positive health gains that we want to deliver, the do no harm is minimized? Because today, some of it is already seen. We see already on the anti-vaccine movement where measles is appearing or reappearing in countries that it was eradicated. The 4th one, which is the one I will maybe talk a little more, is the new governance models. I think Stefan mentioned a little bit about some of these new governance models. How can we ensure, as we think AI, the algorithm, the computing power, and the data, we do not just bring the rules of engagement that we are used to in the physical ecosystem into the digital ecosystem, because some of them will not work. How can we rethink on the things that we need to change as we go through that journey of digital transformation? A good example I have is the gaming disorder. It's a new disease that was recently classified in the International Classification of Diseases 11. A gaming disorder is a disease. And some of the industry, the gaming industry were not very happy with that. So they approached WHO saying, no, this is, how can we do it? Now, let's talk about the gaming disorder as a disease. Now, where do you address that disease? In the physical ecosystem or in the digital ecosystem? Do you tell the gamer that is going through the process of actually developing that disease, do you tell the gamer about that disease in the gaming ecosystem or in your physical ecosystem, which is the hospital and clinics, when he or she already has got that disease? So we need to reimagine, rethink, how do we approach this transformation in that digital ecosystem to ensure we reap the benefits. Now, the quality of AI and for health, taking aside and putting aside the whole hype and then coming down to the real benefits, those benefits are extremely, can deliver an extremely good result, as the other panelists mentioned. But we need a digital health, a new order on the digital health ecosystem. We need to think differently. We need to actually undo some of our principles. We might need and we need a new research order. How do you do research in the digital health ecosystem? How do you ensure that you use AI to accelerate? I think Naomi mentioned a bit, I think was the colleague from FDA, about how do you accelerate that, the clinical trials using digital health and AI. Stefan mentioned the international health data regulation. Let's move back 500 years ago. Let's imagine that you as an individual, that as you move 500 years ago, where the principle of rights, equity, were not well defined. And now bring that principle into this age and take it to the digital ecosystem where data, the rights, principle, and ethics are not well defined. So what do you think will be the end result? So we need to redefine these principles in that digital ecosystem to ensure that data, or free data flow, or equitable share of revenue of data is somehow regulated in such a way that it's just not a number of people that, a number of entities that have the capacity to use and harness on the data to reap all the benefits at the expense of the other. So we need to have a discussion around that. And we need to make sure we leave no one behind. How can we ensure that the 49% of the population that is still not covered by broadband, they also realize those benefits of digital health and AI? Now, at WHO, we are currently in the process of taking, through our member states' approval, the global digital health strategy that went through public consultation, and we took it through a number of iterations. So it has 4 strategic objectives. So you might think that I like the number 4. Some people think that we always remember the sets of 3. So I bring you the sets of 4. So as we go through the transformation, we need to also rethink a little bit how do we enhance our capacity. So the one is, how do we ensure that one of the strategic objectives of the global digital strategy is to make sure that global collaboration and then an advanced transfer of knowledge is there. So global collaboration includes setups like this, maybe with more government people, maybe with more people from civil society, maybe with more people from other sectors that we might actually ignore or forgotten. The second strategic objective is, how do we drive that implementation of national health strategies? And how the digitalization of a country is part of their national strategy. It's not about e-health strategy separate from national health strategy. The e-health strategy or digital health strategy has to be an integral part of the national health strategy. The third strategic objective is, how do we strengthen governance, which I did mention before. And the fourth one, how do we make sure that we are people-centric? Meaning, we at WHO and many other UN agencies, we tend to, traditionally, we speak to policymakers, ministers of health. Yet, the industry, the tech industry, is a consumer base, so it speaks directly to the consumer. And if you think about the other transformations in digital, such as the hotel industry, in the past 15 years ago, I would only rely on the government rating to say the hotel is a 5-star or 3-star. Today, I rely on TripAdvisor. So people-centric health systems is key to leverage on AI, quality of AI, and the digital health that benefits all and leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Going from 3 to 4 reasons is also good with powers of 2, just to mention that. So our final speaker is Christoph Kalle from the Berlin Institute of Health. Christoph, please.
Yes, I think almost everything that should be said in this session as an intro has been said, but probably not by everybody. So I'm still getting up and without trying to irritate anybody, but I wanted to take you through a very real-world example of some of the things that are happening, and while you are helping me doing this, I can actually discuss a couple of those issues with you. So for those of you who have already been dabbling on your smartphones, you can keep them out. For those of you who haven't, maybe you want to take yours out. Anybody without a smartphone? One? I see one. Okay. So if you go to the App Store, you can find work that an employee of our own department has done, which is the Smoker Face app. And there's also one that is called the Sun Face app. These are apps that are gamification of prevention. They teach people what they are going to look like if they smoke X packs of cigarettes or expose themselves to X decades of sunlight. And one of the most effective sort of private measures you can take, and this is a non-commercial app environment, so that Titus Brinker has done and his team, one of the most effective things in healthcare that you can do today is spread this app with 5 people who you know. The younger, the better. Because it will show to them what they are actually going to look like if they continue what they're doing. I think what we have heard is we are in fact entering the brave new world of having information available to do these things. And so let me take you where you're looking at this and then you're saying, well, this is not really AI. Let me take you to where this is AI. So if you are developing sun lesions on your skin, and there's another app that you would find under AppDoc in that system, the group has created a third app where you can basically take a picture of that lesion and send it to a doctor. And that allows you to do basically almost free of charge triaging, where a live medical doctor can tell you within 24 hours, is this a lesion that you should have taken out the next morning, or is it something that you should scratch and look again at it maybe in 3 months, or you should altogether forget, which is of course indicating in one very simple example of the advantages that we have in the health system if these programs are done right, because we have a strong effect of democratization and access that these programs can bring. We had a very much problem-oriented discussion basically on the way here by the previous speakers, and that I think is very important. And of course you as regulators and as administrators and as doctors need to be very careful about what you do, but we shouldn't forget about the chances of what we can do. And so to give you an understanding of what the power of this is, that group has then gone on to look at these photographs by the available AI libraries, the machine learning libraries for image analysis that you can find in basically the common internet as free software. And it is possible for a group of 4 or 5 scientists to build an AI algorithm that is as strong or beats experienced dermatologists in doing their 80% correct analysis as to what this brown speck is going to turn into a melanoma or not. And then they have gone one step further. This can also be done for the microscopic analysis. Just the lesion under the microscope, that distinction by pathologists is around 80% precise, and you can build from public knowledge, from public software, AI algorithms that allow you to do the determination at about the same precision, meaning that again here you have an element of democratization, you have an element of triaging for people, you have the possibility to create navigation systems, if you wish, for the patient journey, for the, as Bernd Montag has indicated, to make sure that the healthcare process, the quality of the healthcare process as it spreads through the systems and through the countries has a much better quality control. And we are talking about the risks of all of these digital issues that we are currently creating. But I'm still remembering very vividly the paper from, I think, 2016 indicating that medical error is number 3 of the death statistics in the United States. So it's not really like the non-processing of data and the non-checking of data is risk-free. In fact, it kills thousands and it brings hundreds of thousands to the hospital in the larger countries. And so I think as we go on with the discussion of the chances, with the discussion of the evaluation, also with the discussion of the risk, I think we should very much and strongly focus on the benefit that these developments can bring to our patients around the world. Thank you very much.
I promise this will be confusing and interesting at the same time. Confusing in the way that we haven't sorted things so that you don't get a pitch and we don't try to pitch things, we try to have a discussion. Now, if I look at my watch, it's almost 1 hour, so instead of using 7 minutes, on average you used 10 minutes. Yeah. Nevertheless, we have 30 minutes left. What we could do with those 30 minutes, we could structure them into 3 blocks to discuss. 10 minutes for maybe still drilling into what is actually the issue with the health system and how is the perception with regards to technology in the health system. I think there have been things said that people want to talk about and how these 2 fields are coming together and these things. The second 10 minutes, we could talk about what should be done to make things better. And the last 10 minutes, we could talk about what are the opportunities that we have so that we can basically leave this room with an optimistic feeling. So let me maybe, I made video codecs for most of my career and been quite successful, but realized that lots of my work is being used to transmit cat videos. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, cat videos can be very relaxing, can be very good for your mental health, and I have heard people are transmitting cat videos to their colleagues in case some crisis comes up. If you compress a cat video and you make a mistake, the worst thing is that your video receiver is crashing, and then you may have to reboot your device. That's about it. The health system which I entered has been puzzling me with its complexity. It's not only that the patient is complex as a customer, everything is complex. Also the health delivery system, the payment, and then there are no standards on data. Like even here in Berlin, there are different standards on clinical terms, and it is very confusing. So can somebody help me to clear up my confused mind over what are the big complexities of the health system and what can be done much better in the health system from a technology perspective that it's done today? Who wants to start? Please.
Yeah, I think I would like to start with something that might sound very old-fashioned and not very exciting, but I think collectively we have for many decades underinvested into strengthening the World Health Organization with its actual role that it was set up in terms of its normative and standard-setting role. And I think it's at the detrimental to all of us that we haven't really strengthened WHO in that very critical role. And so I do think one way moving forward, and the recent restructure of the World Health Organization, led by Dr. Tedros, was really to set up as well a strong department that deals with digital health issues as well, with data analytics. And I think collectively we should all go, stand behind WHO and strengthen their role within health in a digital age to take on that normative and supportive role, so that we have an enabling environment that we really can leverage. And I think the Lancet Digital Health had an interesting editorial on unicorns and cowboys. And it is a bit of a wild, wild west at the moment, and it's not in anyone's interest to keep that wild, wild west. And so it's good to see that ITU and WHO are working very closely together. But the challenge is, it's not about the sort of using a 20th century role of normative and standard setting role, but actually use digital transformation, as Bernardo alluded to it, to the governance as well of how we actually are going to do that differently. And so I think that's exciting that we can move in an age where we have much more dynamic regulatory approaches, and I know that FDA works very closely with WHO and other regulators on really finding out what does it mean within the 21st century to have that enabling environment. So that would be mine.
Christoph?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to sort of modify that position, or for the sake of the argument, take a slightly opposite view of this, because I think our interpretation that medicine is incredibly complex and therefore doesn't lend itself to digitalization has put us 10 years behind all of the other industries. And so in a way, if you look, say, if for those of us old enough to remember the first versions of Google or even the first versions of Amazon, YouTube wasn't even born, they were much more rough-edged and they had many issues. And so the whole development of IT has been an iterative process, and I think this is something that we now need to adapt in the health system as well. We need to allow for that iteration, and we should probably not regulate too strongly. We should regulate on the safe side, yes, but we shouldn't be regulating too strongly in terms of normation of formats and things. We should leave enough space for creativity. I think we're still at a very early stage. We're sitting here and all of us are trying to find out what AI actually means, which sort of indicates to us we should probably not regulate it too harshly because we don't even have an idea what it is.
You're reaching for the microphone, so I guess then it's you and then Khair.
I mean, first of all, I agree, yeah, if we want to build groups, yeah. Two thoughts, yeah. I very much like the quote, the future is already there, but it is unevenly distributed. And I believe AI is a key topic of distributing the future faster, yeah, of making sure that what has shown to be a great standard, to make it applicable everywhere. It is not necessarily, and that was my point in the beginning also, the new thing which has not ever been done before, but when it comes to making possible for 7 billion people, yeah, what currently is only possible for some, this is for me the first and biggest promise of AI. Yeah? And then a little bit of a discussion maybe it's a provocative thing. We have to make sure also that we don't overburden the AI discussion with topics which we should also have discussed before in other areas. I'll give you an example, and it is a bit of it sticks in my head, and I hope it... there's a discussion about self-driving cars, and maybe you have heard that also, yeah? So, what should the algorithm do when the car is driving and it needs to either kill a granddad or a grandchild? Yeah? How should we program this, and what is the moral question, and so on, yeah? You maybe have heard this. Why didn't we have that discussion in driving school? Yeah? We don't teach this, yeah? And now we burden the technology discussion with this, Yeah? And to some extent, in AI in medicine, I believe we do a little bit of the same thing. Our standards of care pre-AI are biased. Yeah? They were done by hand. Yeah? Patient study of 100 people at the Mayo Clinic. So it's the Mayo Clinic population. Yeah? And then it has been done in Birmingham, UK. Okay, so it's still mainly Caucasian. Yeah? But that's what we always did. It's not great. Yeah? But do we now need to, I just want us to be careful that we don't overburden the discussion about ethics and regulatory in AI with topics which were there before, yeah, and slow down the process. Yeah? So I say this just to be a little bit provocative.
But yeah, perfect. If you want to give applauses also to what I say, I like that. Well, but I think there is maybe a bit too much. There could be a conception issue here on when Stefan says WHO should take on this role. It's actually more of an enabling role that I think you refer to instead of a preventing role. So in order to take up to grab the chances that AI is offering in the health space, there may be, although no, there is actually a need for international action, and I think that need is something that has been identified over multiple times. But I'm not supposed to say so much. So Khair is the
Can I
next
just
one.
quickly respond?
Yeah.
I mean,
All
it's
right.
exactly that enabling. I mean, why does my iPhone, when I send an SMS to your Samsung phone, why does it work? Why do you get that SMS? That's because the International Telecoms Union some years back actually agreed on some interoperability standards. We need some of these sort of enablers, and the role of WHO is really that it can have that on a global level in a collaborative way. So I'm not talking about over-regulation that would stifle innovation. That's the last thing I would have wanted to say. But there is as well the kind of duty of public care. And whilst the physician might have a bias, it's one physician treating maybe 10 people a day. If I have an AI app here, and we've been supporting ADA, a Berlin-based startup, a company that is really strong in terms of systems checker, or sort of, they can't use the term diagnostics, but it's basically a diagnostic tool. That is easily in hand of 5 million people at the moment. And if there are biases in there, it's very different than 10 people by one physician.
So have there been examples in medicine there where we had worldwide scaling? Which ones are they? And
Well, cardiovascular data, we've just seen these massive headlines in the media over the last few months, which really have shone a light on the fact that most of the cardiovascular risk calculations are from studies that are done exclusively in men. Oh, and then we apply it to the other 50% of the population, and we wonder when it doesn't work. So yeah, of course, but I have to say that I agree with Stefan here. When this is 2019, we cannot accept when it's so easy to check a model in another data set that belongs to the Artifical Health Institute that I developed in my hospital, that we don't do that. It's no longer acceptable, I think, to have those kind of biases in data. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to second that. And we do extrapolation quite a bit. Like sometimes you don't have enough data, on example, on pediatrics. So you have to rely on what's available out there. So, and I think there's no excuse. We have to be able to link databases, link knowledge, and utilize it to the most we can. But I just want to address regulations because it's been mentioned quite a bit here. And I think the question is not really under regulations versus over regulations. It's the regulation that's really fit for purpose, And I think there is a level of uncertainty already existing, right? When you regulate a drug, it's a risk-benefit balance. So there is a level of uncertainty because you'll never be able to know exactly every interaction a drug will have in a body. And the question is, what's acceptable uncertainty when it comes to AI or digital tools? And I think that's something, as regulators, we're very aware of, at least at my agency. The other thing I think we should be aware of as regulators is that novelty doesn't necessarily mean additional risk. There are a lot of new tools, for example, around real-world data, around digital tools, around AI in the future. And simply novelty, because we're not familiar with those tools, doesn't necessarily mean those tools will then pose additional risk. And we're very aware of that, and I think that should be evidence-based approach to assessing those risks as we move forward. So I just want to highlight those points.
Thank you. I cannot second more. If we have a world that there are not some key principles that somehow define how we should be equitable or ensure access, then we will have a chaotic situation. But I wanted to come back to some of the role of WHO in some of these other countries. The health minister of Mozambique, by the way, I'm from Mozambique. She's a good friend of mine. And she told me, look, I've been receiving proposals to do delivery of vaccines and medicine by drone in Mozambique. But she said, but I need motorbikes and coolers because I cannot maintain and sustain a drone delivery. I think the question here is how can we ensure that as the digital transformation takes place, we do not even waste resources by implementing systems in settings that perhaps need something else to make that system sustainable in the long term. We don't create a pilot height that then it's basically a waste of taxpayers' money. How can we ensure that we strike the right balance to, as Stefan said, that to not stifle innovation, but also not create a chaotic situation? I was 2 weeks ago in Silicon Valley and talking to the tech industry. And there is a role for them and there is a role for us. But they told me one thing. They said, look, we developed a platform and that platform was empty. And because we, the regulators or the governments, did not fill that platform with accurate information, the inaccurate information took over. So there is a role for, as these innovations come into play, we cannot just stay sleeping and wake up when harm is there, when negative impact on health takes place. So working together to actually think about those unintended consequences and then be able to implement measures to make sure that, for instance, on the social media, the accurate information should be there long before the inaccurate information on vaccines, for instance, took over. So the right balance is key, and the right balance we can only achieve that if the sectors involved are able to openly discuss, understanding that from the private sector, there's a drive for profitability. From the public sector, we want to make sure that there's access, there's a low-cost access in low resource setting, but to ensure that there's the health care and health coverage is wide. And then from the academia to make sure that there's, on the research side, there's evidence and access to that data on a free data flow agreement or some sort of that ensure that the evidence comes back. But let's not forget one element, the role of the people in ensuring that whatever it comes out, be it well-regulated, not regulated, the voice of the people is heard and is actioned. Thank you.
Okay, so I asked Thomas if I could pick up on one other theme that we discussed, which was about the quality of evidence. So there's many of us who think that we need to reinvent this way that we analyze any kind of intervention, but really I wanted to give you all a test and work out whether you were paying attention to what I said. So when Christoph said it's 80% accurate, what should you guys have said? And 80% accurate, well, that's great. So it works fine, 80% in the data set, but what's the real endpoint? Does it save lives? Does it decrease mortality? Does it improve morbidity? These are the kind of endpoints that we should care about. And we're all here, hundreds of us sitting here talking about artificial intelligence for health. And we have no trial that proves that it works for any of those meaningful endpoints. So what I think that we need to do as a community is go, yeah, and why, and more. We need to ask ourselves for more. We know that we're here around this kind of phase 1, phase 2, and, that's possibly fine. But we have to push for more and say, okay, it's not that we don't want to do a randomized control trial because it's not the right thing to do. We have to be sure that it works. We can't be seen not to do it because we're going to invent some other data set that gets round this accountability that everybody's been kind of beholden to. So, I know I'm kind of conservative amongst the panel sitting here, but, I really want people to leave here asking those questions that take us forward, like, and what, and why, and what's the point?
Since you mentioned the 80% of Christoph, he probably will want to respond to that. But you only got 30 seconds, so I'm taking...
Yeah, the 80% is basically if you see a dermatologist about that lesion, they are going to see 4 out of 5 melanomas as what they are, which is pretty helpful, right? So, and they can't get at the last 20% just by visual inspection. They have to do other diagnostic measures. So that's all that this is saying. There is no alternative unless you want to skip seeing your dermatologist.
Exactly. Been there, done that. Everybody of you go to the dermatologist for that. Now, we have 14 minutes left. We are 7. I'm counting myself in here now. And I would like to take those 14 minutes and give each of you 2 minutes to basically tell us what's the opportunity that we should be taking up with AI for health. What is the thing that we should be doing given what we know about it, particularly after enriching our horizon after our panel discussion. So who wants to start? Christoph, you want to start?
Yeah, I want to go back to the image that Bernd Montag has given, a crawl before you walk, before you run. A lot of our health systems, and certainly the one in Germany, we're still swimming towards the beach. We're not even crawling yet, because the availability of data from the routine care process is still something that we need to do a lot of work on.
Great. I don't have to take time. You want to continue?
Yeah, I mean, partially philosophical thought. I mean, we are on the one hand, we are very much thinking about, hey, well, how does that technology develop? I believe what is as important that we think about ourselves. Yeah, how does it redefine our role? Yeah, we see that very much in our client base. Yeah, where I said in the beginning, it is elevating the role of radiology, and I believe that what we need to learn is that there are certain things AI can do better. These are not necessarily the most intelligent tasks. Yeah? And we need to define ourselves as, so to say, as what is the next level? How can we elevate our role when AI takes care of the rest, of the routine tasks? Yeah, so I think it's important not to only look at how does the technology develop, but how do we look at ourselves?
Thank you. Let me first, because Stefan mentioned support to WHO, so I want to thank specifically Stefan and Botnar for that, and we definitely need support from all of you as we navigate this journey of digital transformation in the healthcare sector. I just wanted to maybe mention one area we didn't talk about it in this panel, which is digital literacy. I mean, you can have tools, you can have device, you can have a lot of advancement in terms of clinical trial or trial and assessment and regulation, but if there is no digital literacy at the end point with the nurses, the midwives, and the healthcare providers, so the gains that the technology itself promises to deliver will not be realized. So let's not forget the digital health literacy all the way across to make sure that primary health care, the gains in the primary health care, the gains in diagnosing diseases at the early stage before it's too late is realized with the assistance of AI for health.
Okay, so I'm also going to go quite near term and say, you know, what I would really like to come back here next year or in 2 years and say that we have seen in the last year is at least one real set of evidence that AI works for some kind of clinical application. So we know that lots and lots of medicine is about pattern recognition, diagnosis, prognosis, working out which treatment works for which patient. We know that there's a whole huge amount of electronic data since the widespread adoption of electronic health records. What would be amazing is to come back and say that we've seen a trial and it compared AI plus physician with physician, or AI plus whatever with whatever is the current gold standard, and that there was a really demonstrable improvement in, you know, mortality, morbidity, and that there weren't any untoward side effects. Because I think we assume that, you know, the people who are kind of really excited about this area believe that that's what's going to happen. But of course, there are so many people who don't believe in this area, who are not here. And I think to have that kind of level of evidence would really give us a clear idea of what implementation looked like and what the improvements could be.
I want to second everything Naomi said. I think we need evidence. We need a little bit better kind of comparative studies here to be able to move forward with knowledge, at least. The thing I want to highlight, though, is I think there is an opportunity for better communications, for better coordinations at the global level, at least at this point. And I think we really need to provide clarity to our stakeholders, ultimately the patients. I think the more clarity we can provide across the spectrum, the better it is. And I think that will happen through communication and collaboration. And I see there an opportunity. And the reason I think we really have to have robust communication and collaborations, I don't see AI as the same old kind of innovation. I think it's going to change a lot for us. You know, to give you one example, and a lot of you are aware, some of the biggest breakthrough came from teams that do know nothing about health. They have no experience in health. For example, the protein structure prediction, you know, competition that happened recently in South America, and the team that won it was a Google team, none of biologists. You know, they're all computer scientists. So the world is really changing at a rapid pace. You know, we used to talk about the Turing test, you know, a few years ago as something that we are aspired to pass. Google Assistant right now can make appointments for you. You know, so things are happening at a pace that's really rapid, and not just based on hardware. You know, you can buy a new phone and get 5G right now, but also the company can send you an update over the air to change everything. Tesla is sending an update over the air right now to increase the range of your car. How can you deal with that from a regulatory perspective? We have to coordinate. We have to really do much better at coordination and providing clarity. Thank you.
I think a key issue that I would like us all to take out of here is a mindset shift. I think within health data, but data in general, we've sort of been started to believe that this is a commodity that is scarce and limited. We talk about data as the new oil. We talk about data mining. These are all commodities, scarce, resource limited. Data can be easily replicated and easily stored. And so we need to move into an abundance mindset. We need to make sure that data is not hoarded, but data can flow. And only when the data can flow can we collectively derive value out of this data. So we really need to think, what does it mean within health data to become a global public good, that we can really leverage and unleash the power that AI, that's very data hungry generally, actually can bring forth. So mindset shift from scarcity to an abundance mindset around data.
Well, that's great. You guys are faster. I don't know why am I so scary as a session chair. There was a question from the audience. So we have first you, and down here. Any other questions? A third one, and the lady over there, the fourth one. So we have 4 questions. We'll have 4 minutes and 4 questions. If the question is longer than the minutes, we're not going to answer it. It's the 4th row, please. Or the 3rd row.
3rd row? Hello, thank you for the panel discussion. I'm Gizem, and I'm a student. I'm working at IT at Siemens Healthineers. And I would like to know from all of the people here, doesn't matter where you are, if it's a company or an organization or something else, is every department, does every department has a database which is reliable? If you think about sales, if you think about IT, if you think about perhaps diagnostics department or something else, communications, if you want to use AI, you have to get your database with reliable data, and then you have to run it. You have to care about it. And I see a lot of IT departments, doesn't matter where, and there is no customer service for the IT where the data is, where they care about it.
So your question is, we can't even keep our website up to date. Why should we keep our patient data up to date?
Yes, the thing I want to say, sorry, is medtech. If you want to use technology, you have to improve it in every department, because if you collect it together, then AI will happen. And if we think about collecting data, when do we have to start collecting data from the patients? Does it start in the baby phase or before even? So perhaps, what do you think about ethnics meeting tech?
Anybody wants to answer when we should start collecting data?
I think if you look at the role of departments inside organizations, the maturity level, it varies depending on which company you're talking about. But on the other hand, you have to think that there are some specialized company, digital giants, that really went ahead, the Apples and the Googles, the Amazon. They took these management of huge data with their computing power to the next level. So the question is not about whether your department has and is able to manage well the data, it's whether you are leveraging on the existing company's tools and resources to really get the best for your company. So I think that's, I have to say that, if you ask that question, the response will vary. Some companies are doing that, some others not. But then you have to ask, if you take that to the government level, how does the government feels about having their data managed by Google? You can imagine the answer. So yes, you can leverage on the existing companies that are doing well to actually do well. But if you don't do that, then you might not do well.
Thank you. Please try to keep your question below 1 minute, because we have 1 minute overall.
30 seconds. My name is Paolo Villeri, Director of Department of Public Health and Infectious Diseases of Sapienza in Rome. I'm a student too, however, even if I'm quite old. I wanted to say that we are after the 25 years of evidence-based medicine, and I think that now we know perfectly that the question of which are the interventions that are effective are maybe less important compared to the question which are the interventions that are able to change the professional behavior of healthcare professionals. So I think that we need some sort of solid evidence in order to convince healthcare professionals to use this kind of system. Even if in some cases, such as, for example, the classical example of paracute, maybe that this evidence is not needed, but we need a sort of common sense without going in some direction in a way that is direct. 30 seconds?
That was not a question, it was a statement. Okay. The lady over there, would you want to? And please ask questions.
Hi, my name is Maria Teresa Ferretti from the Women's Brain Project. The gender topic was covered, so I'm not going to ask about that, but I have another one. I want to be the devil's advocate a little bit, because I think data are a commodity. They are easily stored, but they are also easily stolen. And there is a concern in the civil society that this can impact your life. The more data we give, the more this data could be used against us. Genetic data, but even personality data. I just read a paper that said that from your personality trait in college, you can predict the risk of dementia later on. So what if this data come to my future employer. So I would really like to hear your perspective on this topic.
We had an ethics person invited to the panel, and she couldn't come. That answers two of your points. But yeah, I think ethics is different. And Khair, please go ahead.
I think it's a great question, by the way, and I don't think we have great answers for it at this point, but I think this point specifically should be really addressed and should be the focus point. In the United States, we have the Office of Human Research Protections, and recently they have a meeting. It's available online publicly. I'm happy to send you the link. On trying to answer those questions with increased data collection, what does that really mean for patients? What kind of additional risk that might be added? And the concept of privacy and identifiability, those are evolving concepts along with the data that you're going to generate. In the United States, we have to actually rethink the definition of identifiability every 4 years, because we know technology is evolving really fast around it. So I'm happy to send you the link, but to your point, those are critical points that we should all work on and address.
Yes, and at WHO we have just created a group on ethics and AI for health, just to make sure that we look at this particular issue, because yes, it is a risk that it needs to be managed, and the ethics and AI, it can do harm, and it can actually create situations that we should start thinking about them now. I was in a lunch session that talk about health security. The concept of health security today should be redefined to include ethical issues, cybersecurity issues, to make sure that as we go through that digital transformation, we don't react, but we act up front. So yes, it's a very important issue, and at WHO we are keenly taking a close look at this issue.
Yeah, an interesting point. We did recently a survey among 1,500 young people in 50 plus countries, looking at exactly some of these issues. And actually, for many young people, the data issue is a concern, but their biggest concern is they don't have. Their answer generally was they don't have a problem have their data shared, etc., as long as they know they're not discriminated against. And so I think we have to really think, okay, within health data, as we probably will have increasingly, the traditional concept of privacy is falling on the wayside. So we have to move to new concepts, and that means, okay, if your data is somewhere out there, and even with the new technologies, you can generally reconstruct. So the depersonalization is questionable for the future, but we need to make sure there is absolutely no discrimination against you if that data is more in that public-private space.
I mean, one comment. I think GDPR is a wonderful thing. And I think we need to have that attitude. I mean, it's now a little bit also I try to be a European patriot here. I think this is something we should see as a huge innovation and effort, that we take this serious, and that when the public is reached by digital health offerings and so on, that people know that this is taken care of. Because the discussion and the concern can kill progress, when people have that concern. And that is why I think we need to be rock solid all together, and need to be a role model in Europe with implementing GDPR, and not to see it as a pain.
Well, thank you very much. That actually deserves another panel discussion, health databases and GDPR, privacy, human rights, etc. So 2 things we have to wrap up. I'm getting the angry views from our boss here. We have to wrap up the session. One thing, can we go on for another for a few minutes? Can you say yes? Detlef, can you say yes or not? Okay, so we can go on. Are there more questions?
I strongly dislike the comparison with a driving school, because you need someone who decides and who takes the responsibility for a decision. And my question is geared in that direction. Who takes decisions, or who is responsible if AI takes a decision?
Who is interested in answering that one?
I mean, on the driving, so MIT Media Lab did actually this moral machine, which is really interesting, and they have now more than 2 million people starting to answer this. And I think we have to see ethics and discussions around AI needs a public discourse. And these are things that we need to have more robust discussions. And that requires more investments. And I do think there is high risk at the moment that we will have considerable backlash because of the lack of actually that kind of public citizens engagement around these issues. And if we look at how much investments go into technology development and compare that how little goes into sort of the discussions around the societal adaptation, I think there is a big sort of difference between the two, and we do need to have much more robust sort of ethical discussions. That's why it's very welcome that WHO is setting up that ethics and sort of societal for AI and digital group.
One more down here. Okay, up there, please. All right, I've been told 5 more minutes.
Estrella Lazuri from MSF. Thank you for the panel. And I just want to ask, what are you all doing to ensure that AI doesn't increase the gap between what's happening in high-income settings and in low-resource settings, where EMR are a long way from being implemented? Digitalization, yes, of some of the data, but aggregated data. And what are you doing to make sure that not only data-driven AI, but other resources are applied to low-income settings? Thank you.
I believe AI is one of the most promising technologies when it comes to democratize health or healthcare. Because now I'm coming again from the imaging angle. Having technology which makes sure that you don't need to have a super skilled person to take an X-ray image and do the first basic interpretation is something where AI really has practical, real life advantages which are happening today. And it's solving with technology where we otherwise would need to build up an ecosystem of training and whatever. So I believe AI is a huge accelerator of progress and bringing progress, as I said before, to the 7 billion people. And in other topics, in immunotherapy or whatever, it certainly is very different. But in AI, I think it is really going in that path. I would disagree. I see that.
I would even challenge the concept of low-income, middle-income country. I mean, you might want to think about communities, because as the digital transformation takes place, the concept of a national geographical border is blurred. So you have low-resourced communities in high-income countries. But let's talk about the low-resourced communities in low-income countries, today's definition. You have other issues in addition to access. You have power issues. You have issues about water and sanitation. So certainly you have connectivity issues. 49% of the world is still not connected to broadband. So how can you ensure that the beautiful AI that can work on a smartphone to diagnose skin cancer, it's able to deliver the results that is based on data that requires the broadband connectivity, okay, which does not exist in some of the low resource settings. So that's why, collaboration, working together and making sure that digital health or healthcare transformation into digital age is not just an island, it's a part of an ecosystem of development to ensure that the benefits and the potential, which I fully agree, it's there, it's really taken, it's really taken by those resource communities to deliver that universal health coverage, because otherwise we will be serving 51% of the world.
Now I've been told to stop, so we'll stop now. I have two more things to say. One is, if you type AI for H into, let's say, Google, you find the focus group, and if you're interested, please contact us, engage. We'd love to have you with us. Second thing, if you want to dig deeper into this and learn about new things, tomorrow there's a session at 11 a.m., am I correct? Stefan has put it together. I guess it's on AI for health, and we can dig deeper and learn about what the future has in it for us, and hope to see you there all tomorrow at 11 a.m. Otherwise, I wish you a pleasant and interesting and I hope uncomfortable World Health Summit, as I learned yesterday. Thank you very much.